Welcome to another audit walkthrough video from SuperfastCPA. I'm Logan, and in today's video, we're going to be going over Audit Area 2. This is Section B1. This is a remembering and understanding topic. Understand the business cycles, and that would be things including the trough, the expansion, the peak, and recession. And just letting you know, this is only part of a blueprint topic. The other part of the blueprint topic talks about economic indicators, such as leading indicators, lagging indicators, and things like that. So we're going to talk about that in the next video because I felt like there was enough to talk about in this video with just learning about business cycles. And we are going to be learning about business cycles the SuperfastCPA way, which is diving straight into the questions to learn the material. Now, if you don't know much about our strategies, make sure you go to SuperfastCPA.com and sign up for our free 1-hour webinar. We go over the key ingredients to passing the CPA exam. And again, it's free, it's 1 hour, and we will show you how to pass the CPA exam without wasting months or even years of your time. So make sure you check out the webinar. And after you watch the webinar, you're going to want to learn more. So make sure you check out becoming a SuperfastCPA Pro member. Pro members get access to the Pro course, where Nate explains in detail exactly what you're supposed to be doing every day. Basically, it's an expanded version of the 1-hour webinar. And they also get access to the full 10-question versions of these 5-question YouTube videos. So just to make sure that's clear. In this video, we're only going to be going over 5 questions, but SuperfastCPA Pro members will get access to the full 10-question version that's going to be posted in the member forum, so they can get a little bit more practice and a little bit more understanding. So if you like this and you like our other videos or our other products, again, make sure you check out becoming a Pro member of SuperfastCPA. With all that, let's dive straight into the questions. All right, here we are at question 1. Let's just dive straight in. Which of the following best describes the concept of a business cycle? Okay, let's walk through this. Option A, the periodic fluctuations in economic activity, typically measured by GDP. Option B, the government's annual process of setting fiscal policies. Option C, the continuous and steady growth of an economy over time. Or option D, a predictable pattern of stock market performance. Okay, so if you don't really know what a business cycle is, at the very beginning of the video, we talked about expansion, trough, things like that. But if you don't really know what that is, that's okay. We are using these questions to learn about business cycles and what goes into them so that you know them for the audit exam. So if you don't know the answer, that's okay. We're going to look at the answer right now to start learning about this. Okay, here we are at the answer A, the periodic fluctuations in economic activity typically measured by GDP. So that's basically what business cycles are in a nutshell, but let's walk through the explanation to learn a little bit more. A business cycle refers to the recurring pattern of expansion and contraction in economic activity over time, or basically the economy going up and the economy going down, over time. These cycles are typically measured by changes in gross domestic product, or that's GDP. That's basically, in a nutshell, how much product a country is putting out. We're not going to go super deep into that, but that's a lot of the times how they measure business cycles is GDP going up and down, and consist of several phases, including expansion, peak, contraction, and trough. And we're going to learn about each of those throughout the rest of this video, so we'll get to those each. While all economies experience business cycles, the duration and intensity of each cycle can vary due to factors such as changes in consumer and business confidence, technological advancements, government policies, external shocks, and that would be things like financial crises or global events. Think of the global pandemic we just had not too many years ago, and shifts in supply and demand. And we just talked about supply and demand in the previous video. So again, these are all things that can cause business cycles to be longer, to be more intense, to be shorter, whatever the case may be. Business cycles do not refer to fiscal policy decisions, continuous economic growth without downturns. So it is about continuous economic growth, but there will be downturns throughout it. And it's also not about stock market trends, though financial markets can be influenced by business cycles. So again, stock market trends is not the main idea behind business cycles, but business cycles can affect stock market trends. So, they are connected, but they aren't explicitly caused by each other necessarily. Now with that, we've talked about basically the idea behind business cycles. Now let's go to the next question to start learning about each piece of a business cycle. All right, here we are at question 2. Which of the following would most likely indicate that the economy is in an expansion phase? Okay, let's go through the options. Option A, a period of economic stagnation with no significant changes in output or employment. Option B, declining business investment, rising unemployment, and shrinking GDP. Option C, economic activity at its absolute highest before a downturn begins. Or option D, rising GDP, increasing employment, and growing consumer confidence. Okay, so just based off of the word expansion, I'm pretty sure you can knock out 2 of the answers, but if you don't know the answer, that's okay. Pause the video, think through this, and when you're ready, come back. We'll look at the answer together to start learning what an expansion is. All right, here we are at the answer D, rising GDP, increasing employment, and growing consumer confidence. Those are the signs of an expansion phase, so let's walk through this. Expansion is the phase of the business cycle where economic activity is growing. It is characterized by rising gross domestic product, and again, that's GDP, increasing employment, higher consumer and business confidence, greater investment, and rising demand for goods and services. During this phase, businesses expand production, wages often rise, and overall economic conditions improve. So again, this is when things are getting better, things are improving, the economy is doing really good. That's when you are in an expansion phase of the business cycle of an economy. Now let's go to the next question to learn about the next phase. Okay, here we are at question 3. What does the peak represent in a business cycle? So let's walk through these options. Option A, the early stage of economic recovery after a downturn. Option B, the turning point where economic activity reaches its highest level before beginning to decline. Option C, a phase where economic output steadily declines with rising unemployment. Or option D, a prolonged period of economic stagnation with no major changes in GDP or employment. Now again, and this is the case with a lot in audit, if you just read through these options and kind of think through what peak usually means, the peak of a mountain or whatever the case is, if you think through things, a lot of the times you can get down to at least 1 or 2 answers being more correct than the others, so you only have to deal with 2 options instead of 4. So again, if you pause the video, I think you should pause the video, think through this, and you'll easily be able to pick out the 1 or 2 answers that are more correct than the other ones, and then we'll look at the answer together to make sure you got it right. All right, here we are at the answer B, the turning point where economic activity reaches its highest level before beginning to decline. And, that makes sense based on what we talked about with expansion. So let's walk through this. The peak is the highest point of economic activity in a business cycle, marking the transition from expansion to contraction. At this stage, GDP growth has reached its maximum. Employment levels are high, consumer spending is strong, and inflationary pressures may increase due to high demand. However, signs of slowing growth often emerge, such as rising interest rates, decreasing business investment, or supply constraints, indicating that the economy may soon enter a contraction phase. And obviously, we're going to talk about contraction next. But basically, peak is where you've been expanding, and you reach that point where you really can't expand anymore. Things are at their highest. The business cycle is just like absolutely about to burst. Things are starting to cost a ton of money because things were working really well. There's starting to not be enough jobs because you just have reached the absolute max of the economy at that point. So that's the peak. Now, after the peak comes the contraction. So let's talk about that in the next question. Okay, here we are at question 4. What occurs during the contraction phase of a business cycle? So based on the previous question, you can probably kind of figure this one out pretty easily, but let's walk through the options anyway. Option A, the economy reaches its highest point before transitioning into a downturn. We literally just talked about that. That's the peak. Option B, consumer demand and business investment rise, leading to job growth and GDP expansion. Now, again, we also just talked about that. That was the expansion. And literally, that's mentioned in the answer right there in option B. Now let's talk about option C. Economic activity declines, GDP shrinks, and unemployment rises, potentially leading to a recession. And option D. Economic activity stabilizes after a period of decline, signaling the beginning of a recovery. So based on what we've learned so far, option A and B, I'm just going to give it to you, are, obviously incorrect. That was talking about the peak and the expansion. Now, out of these 2 options, C and D, which one of these is the correct answer? I think you could probably figure this one out if you haven't already. So if you need to, pause the video and come back when you're ready, and then we will look at the answer to learn what a contraction is. Okay, here we are. The answer is C. Economic activity declines, GDP shrinks, and unemployment rises, potentially leading to a recession. Now, this is obviously more correct than D because contraction is right after a peak, so things are starting to decline, but they're not at their absolute lowest. The contraction phase of a business cycle is marked by declining economic activity, shrinking GDP, rising unemployment, and reduced consumer and business spending. If the contraction lasts for 2 consecutive quarters, and that's about 6 months, of negative GDP growth, it is officially classified as a recession. Now, you've probably heard the word recession a whole bunch of times throughout your life. That's the technical term for it. 2 consecutive quarters, so roughly half of a year, where things are just continuing to go down. It's a contraction that lasts for at least half a year. During a contraction, businesses may cut jobs, investment slows, and consumer confidence weakens. Things are just continually going down. A prolonged and severe contraction can lead to a depression, which is characterized by an extended period of economic decline, widespread unemployment, a significant drop in GDP, deflation, and financial system distress. While recessions are a normal part of the business cycle, you may think that they're not super normal, but they actually happen all the time. Depressions are rare and involve much deeper and longer lasting economic hardship. So it's very unlikely that you'll see a depression, and you might not even be tested necessarily on depression on the exam. But I just wanted to make sure it's clear there's a difference between contraction, recession, and depression. Contraction is just the basic downturn after a peak, but it might not last super long. Recession is where it's been fairly prolonged. It's been around for at least half of a year, And then depression, is not just for a long time, it's also extremely severe. Again, that's very rare. So I just wanted to make sure that the differences were clear with that. Now let's go to the next question. All right, here we are at question 5. In a business cycle, what does the trough represent? So let's go ahead and dive into the options. Option A, the point where economic activity reaches its lowest level before beginning to recover. Option B, the phase where GDP is growing at its fastest rate. Option C, the transition from expansion to contraction in the economy. And option D, a period of prolonged economic stability with no fluctuations. Okay, so again, based off everything we've learned, you probably already know the answer after me reading through those options, but if you don't know, that's okay. Pause the video if you need to, read through these options, and when you're ready, come back, we'll look at the answer together. Okay, here we are. The answer is A, the point where economic activity reaches its lowest level before beginning to recover. That's the trough. So let's walk through this. The trough is the lowest point in a business cycle, marking the end of an economic contraction and the beginning of a recovery or expansion. It is characterized by weak economic activity, high unemployment, reduced consumer spending, and low business investment. However, because the economy has reached its lowest point, conditions typically stabilize, and indicators such as GDP, employment, and production begin to show signs of improvement. So it's just right at the cusp of things starting to improve. So again, it's at its lowest point. The economy has been going down and down with contractions, maybe even a recession, and then it finally reaches a point where it just doesn't really go any further, and then things start to slowly improve and start to turn into an expansion. That's what the trough is. Now with that, we've finished question 5, and before we do anything else, let's do one more part of the SuperFast CPA process called pillar topics. Now, the idea behind pillar topics is as you're going through the questions to learn the material, you will notice the things that keep popping up. You've seen 2, 3, 4 questions trying to teach you what the trough is, or you've seen 2 or 3 questions trying to teach you about business cycles in general, or whatever the case may be. Again, these are the things you notice throughout the questions, and they are obviously the most important because you've seen them over and over again. So you take a moment and you write them out as pillar topics in your own words, and as you're doing this, each day you are building your own personal repository of the most important things you learned each day so that you know what is most important for the exam. So let's go ahead and look at the pillar topics for this video. Okay, here we are at the pillar topics. Let's just go ahead and dive in. First off, let's talk about business cycles in general. Business cycles are the natural fluctuations in economic activity, typically measured by changes in GDP. They consist of 4 main phases: expansion, peak, contraction, and trough. And I just want to make sure that that's clear as we're at the pillar topics right now. The typical flow of the economic activity of business cycles is it starts with an expansion, goes up to a peak, starts going down from that into a contraction, and then down into a trough. So that's the typical order of things: expansion, peak, contraction, trough. So I just want to make sure that's clear. That's the order we did things in this video, so hopefully you kind of picked that up. So I want to make sure you know that. Now let's go through each of them. Expansion. Expansion is the phase where economic activity grows, with rising GDP, increasing employment, and higher consumer and business confidence. Inflation may start to rise as demand strengthens. Now let's talk about the peak. The peak is the highest point of economic activity before a downturn begins. It is marked by maximum GDP growth, low unemployment, high inflation, and signs of economic overheating. Basically, it's starting to get to the point where things can't really keep improving, and the interest rates start to get too high, or again, things start to get too high, and so they have to kind of break eventually and turn into a contraction. Now let's talk about contractions, recessions, and depressions. Contraction is the phase of declining economic activity, which can lead to a recession if GDP falls for at least 2 consecutive quarters. A depression is a prolonged and severe downturn with extreme unemployment, financial instability, and a significant drop in GDP. So remember, contraction is just the general downturn after a peak. Recession is a little bit more intense. It's been lasting for a long time. And depression is quite rare. It's where things are it's been going on for a long time. It's very intense. Things are just at a really low point. Things are not good. Now let's finish off with talking about the trough. The trough is the lowest point in the business cycle, where economic decline stops and early signs of recovery begin. It is characterized by high unemployment, low consumer confidence, and stabilizing economic conditions before expansion. So things have reached their lowest point. They don't really go any lower at this point, and then they start to improve. You start to see small indicators that things are just going to start expanding. You're going to start into an expanding phase. So with that, again, we've learned about business cycles and each of the phases, and that is it for this video. Remember, in this video, we only went over 5 questions because this is the YouTube version, but remember, SuperfastCPA Pro members will get access to the full 10-question version of this video on the SuperfastCPA forum. So if you like this, you can get more of it by becoming a SuperfastCPA Pro member. And the easiest way to become a SuperfastCPA Pro member is by first going to superfastcpa.com and checking out and signing up for our 1-hour training webinar. In that webinar, Nate will teach you the key ingredients to passing the CPA exam in just 1 hour for free. And after that, again, that's the easiest way to start becoming a pro member because you'll learn a lot more by watching that 1-hour webinar. So check out the webinar, then check out becoming a pro member so that you can get access to all the great resources that pro members have. Now, before you go, if you liked the video, make sure to like it and leave a comment. I hope this video was helpful, and I will see you in the next video.